Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to another video on my channel, Hairliciously. If you guys are new, please make sure to subscribe to stay updated on current hair loss treatment news, as well as updates on my second FUE hair transplant journey progress. Visit my website at hairliciously.com to grab your microneedling devices and dermal rollers, both of which are scientifically proven to stimulate hair growth. My low level is Derby Cap, Debunking shampoo and serum, vitamin supplements, and a few other products for those who are suffering from hair loss. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about a topic that really hasn't been discussed as much as it should, especially when it comes to one of the main causes of hair loss. We already know that DHT sensitivity plays a pivotal role in androgenic alopecia, but outside of the whole DHT realm, one important topic that seems to always be underrated is the scalp tension theory. Over the past few years, researchers have actually been going back and forth between the theory that there is or there isn't a connection between scalp tension and genetic hair loss. This obviously led to a lot of the reassessments on the scalp tension theory until recently. New studies have emerged that help build a biological rationale for the scalp tightness hypothesis, as well as evidence that I'm going to be discussing later in this video that support the theory that there might be a direct relationship to androgenic alopecia and scalp tightness. So basically, in a nutshell, the theory behind scalp tension revolves around the fact that the skin tension tends to restrict blood flow to the tissues. A good example of this is an Indian man who kept his hand raised for 38 years in devotion to the Shiva deity, and because raising his arm restricted blood flow, his arm basically withered away and was atrophied. And in the same sense, scalp tension, which leads to blood flow restriction, causes the hair follicles to miniaturize, die, and researchers have shown that balding men and women tend to have chronically tighter scalps than those without hair loss. Excessive tissue tension can therefore lead to an inflammatory response, which if left untreated is going to lead to scar tissue formation. And if scar tissue settles in on the scalp, this also leads to restricted blood flow, oxygen and essential nutrients that need to get to the hair follicles. The interesting aspect is that the same types of tissue tension, scar tissue, inflammation, reduced blood flow are also seen in balding scalps. The onset of these observations are seen in the same pattern and progression as hair loss. So one theory of hair loss is that the scalp tissue tension causes inflammation, which leads to scar tissue and then evokes pattern hair loss. And as I've mentioned numerous times early in this video and throughout various videos, DHT is one of the main causes of genetic hair loss. There's studies that confirm that DHT is higher in the scalps of men who are balding, and we also know that men, before they hit puberty, if they're castrated, they are not going to go bald later in life. And we also know that men who actually have a genetic deficiency in the 5-alpha reductase enzyme that converts testosterone into DHT are never going to develop genetic hair loss. So we know that DHT obviously plays a tremendous role in causing baldness in men, but the thing is that this doesn't really explain why it doesn't actually reverse hair loss. Castrated men are able to stop further hair loss, but they can't reverse it. Same thing with finasteride users or dutasteride, where for most people that are using it, it's going to halt and slow down further hair loss, but the majority of users are not going to be able to regain miniaturized hairs. Now, a lot of researchers have hypothesized that this may be due to the relationship with scar tissue, because there is evidence that shows that DHT causing fibrosis or scarring on the scalp. Balding scalps were seen to actually have 4 times the amount of excess collagen deposition, basically scar tissue, than non-balding regions. And on areas where scar tissue was present on the scalp, hairs cannot grow because scar tissue results in lower blood flow and lower oxygen levels. So the same thing happens when you see burn victims where, on the areas that they get burned, there's actually no hairs there. So the theory behind DHT is that eliminating DHT can actually help halt further hair loss, because stopping DHT stops the progression of scar tissue on the scalp. In another study I read, researchers and dermatologists have noted that balding scalps were tighter than non-balding scalps. And there are some evidence that this tension may come from something known as the involuntary contractions from the scalp's perimeter muscles, which would pull the top of the scalp very tightly. So they actually tested this out in 2015. They used a modeling software to map out the tensile projections on the tops of male scalps based on the contractions of the scalp perimeter muscles. And surprisingly enough, a near perfect correlation between scalp tension peaks and the patterning of androgenic alopecia and the progression of male pattern baldness was actually seen. This is extremely interesting because we know that androgenic alopecia typically starts at the temples and the vertex, and the modeling software showed exactly the same tension areas where men would typically start balding from. So from temples and from the mid-scalp to the vertex. And since scar tissue also onsets in the pattern and progression of male androgenic alopecia, this aligns perfectly with the idea that scalp tension might be the beginning of male pattern hair loss. This also confirms our theory that if scalp tension is indeed causing hair loss, relieving scalp tension should theoretically improve androgenic alopecia outcomes. And this was actually demonstrated through a series of Botox injections on the scalps of balding men, which, not surprisingly, it increased hair growth by relaxing the tension in the scalp muscles, allowing for better oxygen and blood flow and nutrients to get to the hair follicles. But, you know, with all things, I do have to point out that there are people that are trying to debunk this theory, saying that it's bogus, regarding the whole scalp tension and its role in androgenic alopecia. As a matter of fact, back in around the 1950s, this theory was debunked for years and years because researchers believed that hair follicle administration was basically programmed within the hair follicle itself and not by the environment of the scalp. And these researchers found out that non-balding hair follicles, also known as the donor zone or the DHT resistant areas that are taken from the back of the scalp here, were implanted into balding areas, and they still grew just as strong while the surrounding thinning areas continued to miniaturize. And they also did the same thing with thinning hairs. They implanted thinning hairs to non-thinning areas, and they saw that it kept on still thinning at the same rate as other balding hairs in the scalp. And because of this, the researchers ended up debunking the scalp tension theory on causing hair loss, stating that it has nothing to do with the scalp tightness and that it was actually based on just the hair follicle itself. But research does seem to suggest that surrounding scalp tissue influences regulation and proliferation of the hair follicles that they support. And interestingly, survival rates for transplanted hairs decrease as the surrounding tissues are trimmed, which suggests that surrounding hair follicle tissues alongside with the actual hair follicle itself is going to help maintain follicular communication and regulate their growth and proliferation even in their newly transplanted environment. And newly transplanted follicles were also shown to help signal to surrounding tissues to regenerate, which may explain why they can proliferate in balding regions. But obviously this isn't to say that the scalp tension hypothesis is irrefutable. It's not going to explain all the aspects of the causation of androgenic alopecia, but it does go into the other possibility, the possible theories of genetic hair loss instead of just basing it on the fact that it's caused due to DHT sensitivity. If you guys consider how microneedling the scalp can also help induce growth factors and cell proliferation and even break up fibrotic tissue to promote hair growth, this only leads me to believe that the whole scalp tension theory and breaking up fibrosis on the scalp and finding out ways to relieve the scalp tension is actually an effective way to treating hair loss. It's really something to consider and think about, because the more you research, the more that you guys are going to start understanding the basics of the causes of hair loss and not just rely solely on DHT. And because of this, the best types of hair loss treatments, in my opinion, are going to involve using multiple treatments synergistically, since each target is going to treat different mechanisms of action. And it's the reason why you see people see better hair growth when they're combining finasteride with minoxidil and microneedling and laser therapy versus just taking finasteride or minoxidil by itself. And the same goes for any other treatments as well. So I just wanted to give you guys my thoughts and figured this information would be helpful in understanding some of the underlying causes, possible causes of hair loss besides just DHT, especially for androgenic alopecia. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to give it a thumbs up, and I will talk to you guys in my next video. Thanks again, guys, and stay safe.